have to swallow my food. So I want to thank you, everyone, for coming to our lecture candidate interview. Many of you already have met our candidate, Barry Belmont. You may recall he was actually a graduate of our program a few years ago. He comes back to us by way of Lawrence Livermore. So we're very excited to hear what he says. And just to remind you, if you have time to come to his classroom exchange at 1:30 or LVME, that'll be occurring then as well. So without further ado, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I know you have a lot of intro stuff, so I don't want to take that away.
Well, thank you very much. As Eileen pointed out, my name is Barry Belmont, and today I'd kind of like to just talk a little bit about sort of what I want to do for the next 30 years of my life, and that's teaching biomedical engineering. So, hopefully throughout the, oh, check this battery. Oh wait, I turned it on. Everything's okay. Throughout the course of this presentation, I want to give some sense of who I am and what I want to do with a couple of classes here at the University of Michigan. I kind of want to tell you where I am on my career trajectory and get across how I feel this all kind of fits in. And finally, I want to really convey why it is I want to do this. So let's just begin at the beginning and answer the question, who is this Barry Belmont fellow you've heard so much about? My story begins about 29 years, 1 month and a day ago in Orange County, California, where I was born. Shortly thereafter, my parents moved me and my younger sister to Las Vegas, Nevada. And I got involved in a lot of early things early in life. I went to an engineering-specific school, always had something like a half-completed robot in my parents' garage. And, you know, when people ask about Las Vegas, they tend to do, you know, when they find out I'm from Vegas, there's sort of a titillation in the voice. But, you know, to me, it was always just kind of home. It wasn't, you know, casinos and the razzle and dazzle. You know, it wasn't the greatest night of my life that it is for a lot of people. But even then, I should point out, I had some notion of where I wanted to go, even 25 years, 2 months and a day ago. So. For my undergraduate, I went to the University of Nevada in Reno, where I got a pair of degrees in mechanical engineering and biology. I was in a couple of labs. They were material labs. I was in a couple of bands. None of those were great. And I wrote for a couple of outlets. Then I headed over to the University of Michigan here, where I was part of a few research organizations. I was in a few educational organizations and even held an editorial board seat on the university paper. So to complete something of a cycle earlier in life, I've now headed back to the Bay Area, where I've worked in both governmental and legal environments, and I've tried to maintain a bit of STEM outreach all along the way. And now I'm kind of proposing to come back. So that leads to our next question. Why do I want to come back, and what is it I'm actually coming back for? Oh, this is the thing I meant to pass out. If you wouldn't mind taking one and passing it down the line. I'm just going to, I figure what better way to kind of tell you my engineering, my teaching style than to give you some sense of how, without any input from anyone else, because none of my undergraduates would tell me how Engineering 100 worked, and I want to just present an introductory biomedical engineering course of my own making here, and all of this is open to reinterpretation, to revision. This is just a first draft. The way I've kind of structured the class you have in front of you, and I don't know if you, there we go. The way I've structured the class you have in front of you is as a first-year class with about 100 students in a lecture and about 25 students in discussion periods, broken up into about 4 discussion periods. And then I think we're trying to incorporate a project. So with all of that, I kind of designed this course. So let's say you're a student and you come into this class. What is the first thing you care about? It's probably how your grades are decided. So that's this rightmost column here of what is it that I would be grading on? And why do I want to grade that way? Well, if you graph kind of the days in class versus the grades assigned, it's a pretty steady progression of your grades. I do think, especially for a first-year course, you really need to be getting students in the habit of doing work. And so to do that, you just make them do work. So that's why about every 2 weeks, a homework is due, always on the same day, always at the beginning of class. So Mondays, right when you walk in, you put your homework down. Same thing with tests. I've got 3 tests scattered throughout the semester where those are always on a Wednesday, if I can swing it. That way the students don't get any surprises out of any of this. They know what the course looks like and they can perform to those levels. Now, of course, there are going to be times where you just won't be able to, do a homework assignment as well as you should have, or, you just bomb a test. Well, I don't believe that should be the end of your education, and I do believe in giving extra credit for extra work. So if someone draws a particularly good physiological system, or they develop their own little app, I think that's something worthy of tossing a couple points their way. Switching now to this next portion of the syllabus you have in front of you is the discussion section. Now this was all sort of, I came up with all of this before actually talking to the people who do it, the TechCom people, but I think I now have a better sense of what we might be able to accomplish, and I'd like to engage in these sorts of conversations. The way I've got this discussion section designed is to add variety to the lecture, because the lecture is essentially just going to be me on stage telling you how something works, with input from the students, with examples, but where I want a lot of the variety to exist is in the discussions, where students can learn in a bunch of different ways to target. The structure of the way I would envision something like a discussion group is as a writer's workshop, which is when all the students would face each other, or mostly face each other, and talk about a shared set of material. So in this case, something like a reading group, that might include a chapter of the textbook, it might include a journal article, it might include just some heady piece, say from like the New Yorker or something. Really anything, another way to engage their education. I also want to use I would love to be able to use the discussions to review work. So one of the problems that does plague engineering classes from year to year to year is students being able to hand the answers to the next group of students. And that's made possible it's facilitated by just providing an answer key. I think if you do something like, when you turn in homework in the next discussion period, I want all the students to explain how they did their work. That way they get the answers they need, and they get to see how it's done, hopefully without prejudicing the next class that comes up. I think that it would also be a good use of the discussion period to review the stuff that is taught in the class. So sure, I might teach it great, I think I would, but lots of students have lots of different ways of getting at a problem, and if you can have lots of students explaining it to each other and for each other, I think they can understand the material a little bit better. I think that this initial structure also makes it really, really helpful for when the time to review for the clinical project comes, because they're already in a situation where they're already discussing these ideas, they know how to talk with one another, they know how to do things. So that now that they know how to talk, when I give them time to think about their clinical project in the discussion period, they know what to think about and how to think about it. And finally, when we give them time to do work for the project, they know how to best utilize that time. That's sort of my thinking there on the discussion. Now, turning finally kind of to the lecture, to kind of explain how I would envision it, I want to introduce a concept. But before this concept makes any sense, let's go ahead and turn back to our map and just see it applied. The same concept, if you look at it in Yale's introductory biomedical engineering by Mark Seltzman, I think, starts at the level of the molecule, goes to the cell, goes to the tissue, goes to the organ, upwards to the systems and medical devices. This is a really good way of doing it because you integrate the whole scale of engineering throughout the course of the course, and that allows students to build on fundamental knowledge. Now, Stanford does what I call a Bio Plus approach, and this is where you basically you segment the class into a bunch of buckets. There's a biomechanical section, there's a biochemical section. We talk about computer science in biomedical engineering. Quite rightly, Michigan is somewhere in between Yale and Stanford, so far as I can tell, and I think we could really do with a hybrid approach, where we can have this system-level integration, where we go from all the population, from the individual to the organ, down to the tissue, down to the molecules and genes, and at each level emphasize different kinds of engineering. So when we're talking about an artificial kidney or an artificial heart, this is a great place to talk about mechanical engineering. But when we're talking about, say, how cells and molecular dynamics work, it would do well to now emphasize things like biotechnology or material science to be able to view at those scales. So in this way, you get both the scale and the scope of biomedical engineering. Now, if you don't mind, if you do have any questions throughout the course of this, please let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to kind of just highlight a few of the things along the syllabus and sort of why I chose to put them there, or why I would want a certain feature to be present at least in my classes going forward. So I believe the first lecture, first discussion period, the first time you meet a student, it really ought to be more of an introduction. I personally don't believe in just making them do something too strenuous on the first day, especially for a freshman level class. You don't want to shock them out of it. By the second period, though, this is where the shock ought to come. I want to introduce to the students the idea of the biomedical condition, namely that all of our problems, all of our human problems are becoming ever more our own. All the things we're trying to solve are human problems. We kind of know how to build bridges. We kind of know how to build cars. Now we want to know how to build cars that interface with human brains. We want to figure out how to make medical devices the size of the heads of pins. A lot of what we're dealing with is now biomedical data. And that ought to be sort of front and center for a lot of these students. I think, just as I previously mentioned, I do think that a discussion period is a great way to engage the students in another way by having them explain the material both to each other and to themselves. And actually, I think it was in the TechCom, I forget who may have said this, but during the TechCom interview here, someone had mentioned, I didn't know this until I taught it. I didn't know how to do circuits until I taught how to do circuits. I think the same approach can be given to our students. I do believe that since this course, or since this position is trying to get me, you are interested in other classes I might have some interest in, well, I think I might be able to incorporate that in any course that I teach. So in this case, during the interview process, I talked about a signal and image processing class for biomedical data. I feel if that is something that's worth integrating into the curriculum, I could probably find a place for any class that I teach to integrate some portion of the next class I want to teach. Actually, and on that regard, I would love to be able to do the quantitative physiology class here. I feel that would be great. I think for this first reading group that I would want to do something first or second, one of these reading groups, I would like the students to present short summaries of either a journal article or a news article to each other in like a 30-second, 1 minute, 2 minute max presentation. So can you take the cover story of the New England Journal of Science and explain it to your peers in about 2 minutes? It's a really difficult ask, and that particular example might be too difficult, but that's a conversation I'd like to have. One thing I actually thought about just the other day that could be kind of fun is this right here is Winchell's 1963 patent for the first artificial heart. There are 4 sheets of drawings that explain how this patent, how this device works. I think it'd be a great way to engage students in a lot of different facets by having them as a group describe what this patent says. Because if you were to just pick up a patent, you're not going to be able to read it and just say what it does. You have to interpret it. Technical communication is about conveying technical information. It's not about, I don't want to say it, but it's not about reading for fun. No one cracks open the reading, the manual for fun. So I think if you could split it up into sections, so say it was 25 students, break them up into about 4 groups, 6 students each, where they have to explain these figures, what they mean, both to the patent and sort of physiologically why they would want to be done. Why does an artificial heart work this way? How does it affect biology? That sort of thing. I think integrating our technical literature could be a pretty neat way of doing something. I think within the first month, and within just about any biomedical engineering class, there ought to be a clinical perspective. We, as biomedical engineers, are right at that numinous boundary between life and death when it comes right down to it, and we need the other people right in that boundary with us describing what they see and what their needs are. What do the front lines of healthcare really need out of the engineers? What tools do they need? this is a good time to kind of point out, I believe a lot of this class is built on the notion of a clinical project. I've now learned a little bit more about it, so I'd probably revise what I'm about to say, but I still think it's a good enough idea to share. I would believe, especially for something like a first-year class, not to just rigidly constrain the students, but give them a few options. So the first option I had suggested would be something that I'm calling a technical report. This is more akin to just doing a basic science experiment and then reporting those results. So say we partner with a clinical collaborator and they just need to know what the thromboelastography curves look like. Well, I can just get we can get a few students to run those experiments, to design those experiments, run them, and then present their results. I think that could be a good way of addressing some students' needs. I also think it might be kind of interesting to have an ethical topic presentation. So say someone doesn't want to do a science experiment and they don't want to do the next thing I talk about. They might be able to get more out of something by having to report the ethical implications. Because we have students that are going to go on to consulting, they're going to go on to be lawyers, they're going to go on to be doctors, policymakers. And if you then made, as an aspect of this class, the presentation of the ethical dilemma of, say, the genetic modification now made possible by CRISPR, or what is the implication to human values of uterine transplants. There's a ton of different things that someone could present on. And then finally, there's what I'm calling a micro demo, which is a more traditional project-based, there's an app or a device, or there's something you produce at the end. And I think this maps pretty nicely to the goals of the class in general, because you have basic science in technology, in biotechnology. You have the ethical topic that will encapsulate the human values, and finally, the engineers can make anything they want. Another way of viewing this class is also kind of in a three-part structure. So this was the first part, second part, third part. This is actually what I'm calling a three-act structure, if you're familiar with it. So for this first part, first month, all I want to do is get these students comfortable with the idea of what biomedical engineering is and what this class is about to be. In the second act, I want them to be in the habit of doing good work. I want them to be able to learn new materials so that they can solve new problems I throw at them. And then finally, at the end, I would like them to be able to synthesize all these things to produce something new, something meaningful, like the clinical project I had just presented. Kind of now just continuing on, I think the inclusion of Michigan-specific examples, especially in arenas like tissue engineering and biomechanics, where I do know we have some pretty good stuff going on, I think it'd be great to introduce these students to the concept of tissue engineering through, say, a seminal paper in the field or a newly published article. Say someone publishes something really good in Cell, well then that can be incorporated into our reading group, where they have to read it and they can be exposed to science as it comes. For each of these little modules, and modules here meaning kind of lecture, test, lecture, test, I want there to be a variety so that we can engage each student's preferred learning modality. So if someone's really good at just doing creative thinking, I want them to have time for that. If they're really good at taking a test, I want them to have that. If they benefit from doing homework, from doing readings, there's lots of different things that we can expose them to in each module. I think one of the challenges I came up with, and I actually know both Dennis and Jan have seen this. When I give feedback to students, they often take it as gospel, and I really wish they wouldn't. It's just some guy's opinion. I've got some notion of the mechanics of how their presentations might work, but I really do think they benefit most from peer-to-peer feedback. These are the people that ultimately you have to impress, that you're going to be working with for a minimum of 4 years and likely, off and on for your lifetime. So you should get in the idea of giving and receiving feedback from your peers. And then this way, I myself don't have to be the arbiter of what is good. I think around holidays and around certain portions of the semester, things ought to become a little more optional. around spring break, around Thanksgiving in this case, I think it'd be good if we didn't force students to be in the class, but that we enriched those that were able to make it. So in this case, I have in mind something like the biomechanics of wishbone, cracking. And this is actually, I had envisioned as a nice way to partner with a, say, 241. And it actually might be a nice way to do a sequel to a College of Engineering video we had done a couple years back on just a fake way of doing the engineer braking. We can now do it for real. And I actually have a few videos that I might want to do sequels for. One of the things I really liked is lay engagement. So I'd love to be able to make a few of those here. And then, just in case you don't give me that opportunity to do what I want, I've carved out just one little sliver here down at the bottom that is a lecture purely for the lecturer. It is just an enrichment experience where I just want to teach a class that I myself would have liked to receive as a student. So that's the class. Are there any questions to this point on that? It's okay. I know we've got time coming up. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them in a bit. So where am I going with all of this? And I hope I haven't been too subtle on this front, but it was actually about 2,241 days ago that I was first admitted into this program. And I like to think of all the things I was able to accomplish in these 2,241 days since I first knew I was coming to Michigan. It's pretty good stuff. And I'd like to be able to do all of this. And I think about what I might be able to do with the next 2,241 days. There's a lot of things, and there's actually a lot of kinds of things that I would like to do. So for instance, some of them are more artistic. I'd like to be able to make a video series where we partner maybe with the hospital or the College of Engineering, where we can have BME students explain, how does an MRI work? What is ultrasound telling someone? And I think it'd be great for us to be on that front line. There's a few things that I believe should be done that are more practical. For instance, you keep hearing me harp on it, but I think our physical prototyping capabilities ought to really be built up here. I don't necessarily have the best answer for how to do that yet. I need to learn our financial situations, what kind of partnerships we can do, but I think that is something that would be very beneficial to our students. There's a few things that are idealistic. Actually, if I've got the book then. There's this Engineering for the Benefit of Mankind book, workshop. This was actually conducted 50 years ago here at the University of Michigan, and it was a bunch of leaders kind of looking at the next 50 years of what engineering would become and how it has served the needs of people. And I think it would be very great to, 50 is a pretty nice round number. We could do that again. Also, some of you might get a kick out of this. Lawrence Livermore, for as advanced as it is, still uses punch cards. So I'd never seen that before. It was great.
I started coding with that.
That could be some of your code right there. There are a few things that I'll admit are completely career building. These are things like getting to teach any class you throw at me. I would really love the opportunity to teach, period. I mean, that is what I would like to be doing. And then there's a few things that I consider purely fulfilling just for myself. So for instance, there's this anatomical donors memorial program that I've been a part of 3 years in a row. I missed it this past year, but I would love to be able to do that annually, just to speak of the benefits that anatomical donors bring to both the university environment in specific, and then just to biomedical engineers in general. And it's actually topics like that, anatomical donors, that get me thinking of numbers like this. If I, as an average American male, just sort of look at my horizon, I can expect, on average, about 17,271 days left to live, and I kind of want to fill each of those with something meaningful. So that's kind of what I'm after. So how do I intend to accomplish this sort of stuff? Well, one way of seeing that is actually the lecture that follows here, where I'm going to try to give more of an example how I might do a signal and system. So the topic on bioimpedance is my thesis topic, and I think it would fit well into something like a bioelectricity class, a signal and image processing class, a basic circuits class. There's lots of places it can fit in, and this is kind of why I'm giving that. So I want to give you some sense of how I teach. Also, how to fill in the day. Now, this was before I knew I was doing 2 classes a semester, but I think suffice to say I've thought about it a little bit. I can go into any of this in greater detail in the questions that follow, the question and answer period, but I have given it some thought of how I can actually use the hours of the day to make a lot of this happen. So now to answer that that the most important of questions, why do I want to teach biomedical engineering, and then why do I want to teach it here? And I have to say that it's probably because there's like a certain kind of look. It's sort of the thing, the look you kind of get when people are doing, yeah, you recognize these pictures. This is when we taught Explore together. Where you can actually see people really excited, having anticipation about the results that are about to come, and then excitement at their arrival. I think it's really cool. You can really only see it when you're teaching students. There's sort of little quiet eureka moments. And Michigan has given me a lot of times to see this. And in fact, I would contend it looks a little bit like this. Though I should warn you, it's often not as pretty. Sometimes I do have a concerned student or two. So I want to do lots of things that matter, like the K through 12 outreach that I had, that I've been doing all my life. I'd love to be able to stay actively involved in that. I want to do a few things that last here. So for instance, these engineering graduate symposium posters that are still hanging up, they're using a design that I came up with a few years ago. So it just makes me proud to do that. I want to do a few big things. This was our graduate design class, where everyone kind of dressed up as me. They even got the little mannequin they had used. Of course, you can't please everybody, but I think 29 out of 30 ain't bad. And then there's also a few like littler things that, I don't know, just kind of touch your heart. I don't know if you can read it. It says, Barry gave us a compliment, and then concludes, this might be the happiest day of my life, which tells me I ought not to be so stingy with the compliments, so might I just say, what a fine audience we have here today. But I think it's, I have an appreciation for the small things. When I had submitted the final draft of my proposal that would end up paying for my PhD work to my advisor, this was all he said back. But that's all that needed to be said back. I was able to do a lot of things with that, and I hope you'll let me do a few more things. This is what I'd like to be doing. Just one last note. Someone told me I ought to include a PhD there. I got a PhD here. And just one last note. I want to, I'm recording a little thing. I want to wish my sister a happy birthday. It was actually yesterday, but I don't think she'll mind it being too late. And just in case you think I'm the sort of brother that does not share embarrassing pictures, you're definitely wrong. And I'd also like to thank my mom. She's the best teacher I ever had. Pretty proud alumnus, and I hope we made her proud. So if you've got any questions, I'd happily take them. Yeah.